I'm Maisie LaCroix, 33, and I built a steady life from the background, no spotlight, just hard work and quiet loyalty. For years, I held my family together while my younger sister chased her military dreams. But when they told me not to come to her promotion ceremony, said it would be awkward, I made a choice that changed everything. Have you ever been overlooked by the very people you showed up for? If so, drop your story in the comments, you're not alone. Before I dive in, tell me where you're watching from. And if you've ever had to reclaim your place after being written off, hit like and subscribe. What happened next caught everyone off guard. My name is Maisie, and if there's one thing I've learned in 30 years of being a daughter, a sister, and a so-called disappointment, it's that loyalty doesn't guarantee respect. I was the oldest of two girls, born into a family where roles were quietly assigned and never questioned. From the outside, we looked close-knit, family vacations, birthday dinners, matching Christmas sweaters, but underneath it all was a quiet hierarchy. Hannah, my younger sister, was the golden one. And I was reliable. Not exceptional. Just there. Hannah decided she wanted to join the military when she was 10 years old. She saw some documentary on women in combat roles and announced at dinner that night, with total certainty, that she was going to serve. My parents beamed like she'd just solved world hunger. From that moment on, everything in the house subtly shifted to orbit around that dream. My dad bought her books on military history. My mom found a retired female officer who gave Hannah mentorship over Zoom once a month. When she turned 16 and needed help prepping for her entrance exams, I was the one who stayed up late quizzing her. I'd just gotten off a double shift at the diner where I worked nights to cover rent, and she was sprawled on the couch with her notes, waiting like I was her personal tutor. That pattern held for years. Hannah needed help writing her essay for the academy application. I edited it while riding the subway to work. She needed rides to interviews. I called in sick and drove her 3 towns over. When she didn't have enough money for the prep program her mentor recommended, she told our parents she'd figure something out. That something was me transferring $800 from my emergency fund without telling her I couldn't make rent that month. I wish I could say it was all done out of pure love. I do love her, or at least the version of her I grew up with. But part of me believed, naively, that being there for her would mean something. That one day, when she succeeded, my role in getting her there would be recognized by her, by our parents, by someone. Instead, what I got were casual dismissals and the kind of praise that sounds more like a footnote than appreciation. "She's really blossoming," my mom would say when Hannah got into officer candidate school. Then she'd glance at me and add, "And Maisie's doing her own thing too." That thing was 2 jobs and night school. At one point, I was working mornings at a warehouse, evenings at a bookstore, and taking online business classes during my lunch breaks. I wasn't trying to outshine Hannah, I just didn't want to fall apart. It was like the more I gave, the smaller I got in their eyes. They stopped asking about my work. If I brought up something I was excited about, like passing an accounting exam or getting a small promotion at the bookstore, it would be met with polite nods, then immediately redirected back to Hannah. My dad once said, "You're just figuring things out. Your sister's locked in." That was the phrase he used. Locked in. Like her life had a blueprint and mine was scribbles on a napkin. I remember one weekend, Hannah was back on leave and they threw her a dinner party. Extended family came, there was a banner with her academy's emblem, and everyone gave speeches. I'd just gotten off a 12-hour shift and showed up in scrubs with under-eye circles and sore feet. When someone asked what I'd been up to, my mom cut in with, "Oh, Maisie's working a lot. She's keeping busy." I stood there holding a gift bag for Hannah, something I'd spent hours picking out, and realized I had become background noise in my own family. The worst part is, I let it happen. I thought I was being supportive. I thought sacrifice was noble. I didn't want to compete with Hannah, I just wanted to be seen. But the truth is, there's a difference between stepping back to let someone shine and being erased altogether. Over time, our bond became transactional. Hannah called when she needed help, editing, advice, a reference, but never to ask how I was doing. Our parents reinforced that dynamic. They'd say things like, "Hannah's got so much on her plate, be patient with her," or "She needs you right now, can you help her with this one last thing?" Every last thing turned into something else. Meanwhile, I paid for everything myself. No one offered to help with my tuition. No one helped me move when I had to downsize apartments. I was 27 when I sprained my wrist lifting boxes and couldn't work for 2 weeks. I lived on canned soup and overdraft protection. No one called. I didn't bring it up. I didn't push back. That's on me. I believed that if I just kept showing up, someone would eventually turn around and say, "Hey, she's been holding all this together." But no one did. And slowly, I started disappearing in every room that Hannah walked into. At some point, I started keeping track of the imbalance, not out of resentment, but as proof to myself that I wasn't imagining it. When Hannah applied for a security clearance, she needed me to act as a reference. I filled out 22 pages of documentation and stayed home from work to be available for the follow-up interview. When our dad's car broke down and he needed to get to Hannah's officer training ceremony, I lent him mine and took the bus across the city for a week. When Hannah needed to move across the country for a new posting, I spent 3 full days packing and labeling boxes while our parents coordinated her flight and rental car. No one said thank you. I thought maybe when I finally finished my degree, things would shift. I graduated at 29, part-time classes stacked on top of full-time work. I invited my parents and Hannah. They came late, left early, and forgot to bring flowers. Hannah texted me afterward, "So proud of you. That must have been hard. That must have been hard." Like I'd finished a half marathon, not 5 years of balancing exhaustion and ambition with no safety net. The truth is, I had internalized their low expectations. I didn't even realize how low until one day I heard Hannah talking to a friend on speakerphone. She was telling them about a recent training exercise and how intense it had been. Her friend asked if she'd always been that focused. Hannah laughed and said, "I guess. I mean, I've always been the one in the family with the real goals." I didn't say anything. I just stood in the hallway, frozen, realizing that in her eyes, and probably theirs too, I was never more than the support act. And somewhere along the way, I'd started believing it myself. But that's not the end of the story. Not even close. Because sometimes, the people who treat you like a background character forget one very important thing. You're still in the room. You're still watching. And sometimes, one unexpected moment shifts everything. And that moment came. I just didn't see it coming. The first time I realized something had changed, I was standing off to the side at Hannah's basic training graduation. It was supposed to be a proud day, for her, yes, but also for the people who had helped her get there. I'd taken time off work, booked a cheap motel just outside the base, and even brought her a small gift, a framed quote our grandmother used to say, the one Hannah used to love. I thought it would mean something. I thought maybe, just maybe, this time I'd be seen as part of the story. She spotted me after the ceremony. I gave her a small wave. She smiled politely, like I was a distant relative who'd shown up uninvited. Then she turned to introduce the others standing near her, her commanding officer, a few fellow cadets, a woman from the mentorship program she'd joined early on. She didn't mention me. Not by name. Not by role. Not even as my sister. We took a photo together, mostly because my mom insisted. I remember standing next to her in her uniform, beaming, while I looked like a tired extra in someone else's highlight reel. She didn't even look at me during the photo. Just straight ahead, perfect posture, proud smile. That was the moment I knew, whatever role I had played in her success, it had already been edited out. At home, the shift was subtle at first. Our parents would talk about Hannah like she was some mythical figure. "She's really thriving out there," my mom would say at dinner, showing us a blurry photo of Hannah in a group lineup. They said her unit is top of their class. Meanwhile, I just started a new job at a logistics firm. Decent salary, benefits, room to grow. I'd worked for years to get my degree and land something stable. When I mentioned it, my dad nodded and said, "That's nice. What exactly does that place do again?" Then he asked if I'd seen the article about women in combat, Hannah's field. Everything revolved around her. Always. But this was different. It wasn't just pride anymore, it was obsession. Like Hannah represented the entire family's reputation, and I was something to be politely acknowledged when necessary, then moved aside. I overheard them on the phone once. My mom was talking to my aunt, someone I'd always been close with, and I heard her say, "Hannah's really the one with discipline. She's focused, structured. Maisie's still figuring things out." Still. I was almost 30. Full-time employed, paying every bill, keeping a roof over my head without help from anyone. But in their eyes, that wasn't progress, it was delay. The worst part? Hannah started saying it too. Not to my face, of course. But through the grapevine, things reached me. Friends of friends, family members who didn't realize how things would land. Hannah said she made it all on her own. One cousin told me during a birthday party. She's so proud of how she got through without help. Without help. I nearly choked on my drink. I wanted to laugh. Or maybe scream. The rent I covered? The prep course I paid for? The gas money, the airport runs, the nights I stayed up reading through her essays while juggling my own assignments? Apparently none of that counted. Or worse, none of it existed anymore. That cousin must have seen something on my face because she quickly added, I'm sure she meant, like, emotionally. You know, not financially. But we both knew what had been said. And what hadn't. That's when I stopped sharing my own updates. I used to text Hannah about job interviews, or send her photos when I got promoted. She used to at least send a thumbs-up emoji back. Eventually, even that stopped. If she responded at all, it was 2 days later with a generic congrats. That felt more like a customer service reply than anything real. The turning point for me, oddly enough, wasn't even between us. It was a dinner at my parents' house, one of those Sundays where everyone pretends everything's fine because we're all in the same room. My dad was talking about Hannah again, saying how she was on track for a new leadership role, how impressive her evaluations were. She's always had that drive, he said, cutting into his roast chicken. Always knew where she was going. I was sitting right across from him. Quiet. Present. Holding back everything I wanted to say. I'd just finished a 3-week training module at my new job, one that put me in line for a project lead role. It wasn't the military, sure, but it was something. I opened my mouth to mention it. Before I could speak, my mom cut in. Hannah said something interesting the other day, she said, refilling my dad's water. She said growing up, she had to motivate herself. No one really pushed her. I don't remember what I said in response. Maybe nothing. Maybe I just nodded and kept eating. But inside, I felt something sharp twist in my chest. No one pushed her? Was I no one? Was every ride, every late-night study session, every sacrifice, invisible? Apparently so. After that dinner, I started pulling back. Not dramatically. Not with a speech or a fight. Just less. I stopped answering texts right away. I skipped a few family calls. I didn't offer help the next time Hannah needed a reference for a roommate. My parents didn't seem to notice. Or if they did, they didn't mention it. And Hannah? She found someone else. That stung more than I want to admit. I'd always assumed, deep down, that we had a bond no one else understood. That we were shaped by the same house, the same rules, the same quiet gaps in our parents' attention. But it turns out she wasn't holding on to that the same way I was. She let it go. Rewrote the whole story. And the new version didn't have room for me. I still saw her occasionally, holidays, a few family birthdays. But the dynamic had changed. She talked about her job like it was something no one else could understand. She used acronyms I didn't know and didn't bother to explain. If I asked, she gave short answers like she was bored before the conversation began. Once, I tried to ask her about something real. I brought up a news story about military fatigue, long deployments, and family separation. I thought maybe we could talk about what it was actually like for her. She shrugged. You wouldn't get it. I think that's when I realized she didn't want me to get it. She didn't want to remember who had been there before all this, before the title, the uniform, the attention. That version of Hannah was gone. And the new version? She had no use for me. And somehow my parents followed suit. I don't know if it was conscious or just convenient. But slowly, they started treating me like a distant relative. The one who does her own thing. The one they're not worried about. Which is just a nicer way of saying the one they've stopped asking about. At first, I told myself it was temporary. That the military was a phase. That once Hannah settled into her role, she'd remember the past. She'd remember me. But the truth is, she didn't forget. She chose to move on without it. And without me. What I didn't realize then was that the moment I stopped being useful, I stopped being visible. And no matter how hard I tried to stay close, I couldn't compete with the version of herself she wanted to present to the world, one where she'd pulled herself up from nothing. Even if that meant pretending I was nothing at all. 2 months before Hannah's formal promotion ceremony, my parents called me on a Tuesday night. I was making dinner, chopping onions, distracted, and almost didn't answer. My mom's voice was overly cheerful, which I've learned to treat as a warning sign. We wanted to talk about the ceremony, she said, drawing out the words like she was walking a tightrope. Hannah's promotion. It's going to be a bit of a formal event. Reserved seating and all that. I waited, sensing there was more. She continued, the base only allowed a limited number of guests in the family section, and we had to make some choices. It's mostly for parents and spouses. You know how it is. I didn't say anything. Just stood there holding the knife, not sure whether to laugh or hang up. We just thought it might be a little awkward, she added quickly, if you came and didn't have anywhere to sit. Hannah's got a lot of people attending. Commanders, colleagues, mentors. She's under a lot of pressure. There it was. Clean, impersonal, rehearsed. I didn't argue. I said, okay, in a voice that barely sounded like mine. Then I hung up and finished chopping onions, unsure if it was the fumes making my eyes water or something else. I already knew I was going anyway. Not to cause a scene. Not to prove anything. Just to be there. Because despite everything, a small part of me still believed showing up mattered. I wasn't proud of that part, but I couldn't shut it off completely. So I requested the time off, booked a cheap bus ticket, and found a hotel 2 towns over. I didn't tell anyone I was coming. I figured they didn't want to deal with the optics of it, and I didn't want another version of that phone call. The morning of the ceremony, I got up early and ironed my best blazer in the motel room. Nothing fancy, just clean and professional. I skipped makeup, tied my hair back, and took the shuttle toward the base. I didn't know where to go exactly, so I followed the crowd, parents in suits, spouses in dresses, people holding balloons and bouquets. I kept to the edge of it all, like a chaperone who hadn't been assigned a student. When I reached the entrance, the officer checking names gave me a strained smile after scanning the guest list. You're not on the seating chart, ma'am, she said, tapping her clipboard. But there's general viewing along the back wall if you'd like to stand. Thanks, I said, stepping aside. The auditorium wasn't huge, but it was bright and orderly. Rows of white chairs marked with laminated cards, mother, father, spouse, mentor. I saw my parents sitting front row, chatting with someone in uniform. My mom wore her best navy dress. My dad had brought his camera, the one he only ever took out for milestones that mattered. They looked perfectly content. I found a spot near the rear wall, tucked behind a row of potted plants. From there, I could see the stage, the flags, the oversized digital screen counting down to the start of the program. People kept streaming in, greeting each other warmly. I didn't see Hannah until a few minutes before the ceremony began. She came through a side entrance, already in uniform, already glowing in that way people do when they know the room belongs to them. She walked down the aisle surrounded by a small group, 2 senior officers, a woman in a black suit who looked important, and someone I didn't recognize but assumed was a commanding officer. As she passed where I stood, I straightened up just slightly, almost involuntarily. I didn't expect her to stop. I didn't expect a hug or a smile. But I didn't expect what I got either. She glanced my way, paused just long enough for it to count, then gave me a tight nod. Not the kind you give a friend. Not even the kind you give someone you're trying to impress. It was the kind of nod you give a casual coworker you run into at the grocery store. And then she moved on. The ceremony started, full of formalities and structured praise. Officers gave speeches. Commendations were read out. Hannah stood at attention on stage, accepting her pin with perfect posture and composure. Cameras flashed. Applause filled the room. At one point, during a break between speakers, I overheard her voice. She was standing a few feet away, talking to the officer beside her. I couldn't hear all of it, but I caught this part clearly. My family's all here. I'm lucky to have them. My family's all here. I stood 5 feet away. I didn't move. I didn't blink. I just felt my stomach drop the way it does when the elevator stops too fast. I turned slightly to see if maybe she meant extended family. But no one else from our side was there. Just our parents, front and center. I stayed through the whole ceremony. I clapped when others clapped. I even smiled when Hannah's name was called again for some kind of leadership citation. But inside, I was somewhere else entirely. After it ended, people poured out into the lobby. There were catered finger foods, photo booths, and small gift tables. I hovered near the wall again, debating whether to approach her or just leave. Before I could decide, I saw her posing for pictures with our parents. My dad was beaming, arms slung proudly over her shoulder. My mom adjusted Hannah's collar before the next shot. They looked like the kind of family that had done it all together. I stood there holding the same gift I'd brought to her training graduation, the framed quote from Grandma. Still wrapped. Still unacknowledged. I watched as one of her commanding officers asked who everyone was in the photo. My mom answered quickly. We're her parents. Her biggest supporters. That was it. No mention of siblings. No mention of me. I turned and left quietly, tossing the gift in a trash bin outside the auditorium. I caught the shuttle back to the motel, changed out of my blazer, and lay on the bed staring at the ceiling until the sun set. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just felt done. It was a strange kind of heartbreak, not the loud kind, not the kind you share with friends over wine. It was quieter than that. Heavier. Like something essential had been stripped from me in public, and no one else noticed. That night, my mom texted a blurry photo of the ceremony. Wasn't Hannah amazing? She wrote. We're so proud. I didn't reply. Because the truth was, I wasn't even angry. Not really. I was something worse. I was invisible. And for the first time, I stopped believing that would ever change. That night, I didn't cry. I drove the 4 hours home in complete silence. No music. No calls. Just the hum of the highway and the occasional flick of headlights passing in the other direction. I kept replaying it in my head, her nod, the way she said, my family's all here, the way not one person in that room thought to question who I was or why I was standing alone. At some point, I started doing the math. I thought about the $800 I'd given her for that prep course, money I'd pulled from my emergency savings because she was too proud to ask Mom and Dad. I thought about the 2 jobs I'd worked through most of my 20s, the ones I kept because I needed the flexibility to drive her places, show up when our parents couldn't, and send money when something came up. I thought about the apartment I didn't move into, the one closer to my own job, because I stayed in town for 1 more year to help Hannah study while she finished her final semester. I gave up a promotion that year. It still stings when I think about it. All of it, every favor, every sacrifice, was like a slideshow running in my head as the white lane markers blurred past me on the interstate. And for the first time, I asked myself something I never had before. What did I think was going to happen? Did I think she'd one day turn around and say, "Thank you for everything"? Did I think my parents would sit me down and admit they hadn't seen it until now, but I was the one who kept it all running behind the scenes? Did I honestly believe that loyalty was some sort of long-term investment that eventually paid dividends? When I got home, I dropped my bag by the door and stood in the kitchen for a long time, staring at nothing. I wasn't even tired. Just blank. The next morning, I called Maya. She's been my closest friend since freshman year of college. She's known me and Hannah both, has seen every phase, every pattern, every slight that I tried to minimize or explain away. When she answered, I didn't ease into it. I went to the promotion ceremony, I said. They told me not to come, but I went anyway. There was a pause. Then, you okay? Not really. I told her the whole thing, where I sat, what Hannah said, how my parents posed for photos like a perfect nuclear family with a daughter who had done it all alone. Maya didn't interrupt. She just listened, and when I finished, she said one sentence that cut through everything. They treat you like a shadow because they know you won't make noise. She said it so plainly, like it wasn't a revelation. Like it had been obvious all along. And maybe it had. That stuck with me. I couldn't stop thinking about it. A shadow. Always there, always present, never really seen. She was right. I hadn't made noise. I hadn't called it out when Hannah erased me from the story. I hadn't spoken up when my parents redirected every conversation back to her. I'd swallowed it all, told myself it was temporary, that eventually I'd be acknowledged for everything I gave. But that was the problem. I still believed love and loyalty were a fair trade. That being quiet, steady, and reliable would somehow earn me visibility. And I was wrong. I started to look back at all the moments I'd brushed off. Hannah using "I did it on my own" in interviews. My dad praising her work ethic while ignoring the fact that I worked 50-hour weeks through college. My mom saying I was independent, as if that explained why they stopped asking if I needed help. Suddenly all those little moments didn't feel so little anymore. They felt intentional. There's a kind of pain that doesn't explode, it just accumulates. Quietly. 1,000 small cuts that one day make it hard to move without bleeding. That's what it felt like in the days after the ceremony. Not heartbreak. Not rage. Just a weight. Like I was tired in a place I couldn't name. I started spending more time alone. Not out of bitterness, just necessity. I needed to hear my own thoughts again, without someone else's version of me playing in the background. I journaled. Not the poetic kind, just bullet points. Facts. What I gave. What they took. What I missed while I was busy making space for everyone else. I stopped texting Hannah. Not to be petty. I just didn't have anything left to say. She didn't follow up either. My mom sent a message a few days later. A photo of Hannah shaking hands with some high-ranking officer, with a caption that said, "Look at our girl go." There was no "How are you?" No, "We missed you." I didn't reply. That week, I made a small decision that felt big. I unfollowed all of them on social media. It sounds small, and maybe it is, but the truth is, watching someone curate a life that erases you is its own kind of cruelty. I was tired of seeing posts about how it takes a village when I'd been written out of the village charter entirely. I also reread an old email Hannah had sent me during her first year of training. It was one of the last honest things she ever wrote. She'd been overwhelmed, scared she wouldn't pass her evaluation. I'd responded with a long message, walking her through the things I believed in about her. I reminded her of how far she'd come, how capable she was, and how I'd be here no matter what happened. And I had been. But now? That line, "I'll be here no matter what," felt less like love and more like a trap. It made me realize, maybe I was the only one still holding up the idea of sisterhood like a duty. Maybe I was the only one who thought that meant something beyond holidays and formal events. One night, I pulled out a shoebox from under my bed. It had old notes, cards, a few photos, things Hannah had given me over the years. Most were from childhood. One birthday card read, "To the best big sister ever. I couldn't do this without you." I stared at that line for a long time. Then I folded the card in half and put it back in the box. I didn't throw it out. I wasn't there yet. But I didn't leave it on my desk like a keepsake either. Eventually, I called Maya again. I told her everything I'd been thinking. "Do you think I was stupid to expect anything different?" I asked. "No," she said. "I think you were hopeful." That's not the same thing. But I kept showing up for people who didn't even pretend to show up for me. "Yeah," she said. "And now you don't have to." That sentence, simple as it was, felt like the beginning of something. I had been loyal. I had been generous. I had been everything they quietly depended on. And maybe I still would have been if they'd asked, even just once, how I was doing. But they didn't. And something about seeing it all so clearly made me feel less lost and more resolved. They weren't going to wake up one day and see me differently. So I had to decide what I wanted to do with that truth. And I was starting to realize, maybe I wasn't the problem for expecting more. Maybe the real mistake was thinking they were capable of giving it. The decision didn't happen all at once. It started with silence, longer response times to texts, skipped phone calls, invitations I let sit unread. There was no dramatic confrontation. No announcement. Just a quiet shift in gravity. I stopped orbiting around their lives and started focusing on my own. The first real boundary I set came a few weeks after the promotion ceremony. My dad called me on a Sunday morning, the way he always did when tax season rolled around. He never said the words outright, but the pattern was always the same. He'd start with a little small talk, then ease into the ask, usually something like, I just need a second pair of eyes on a few forms, or, you know this stuff better than I do. Except this time, when he said, hey, you around later to look over my return? I said, I don't have time right now. There was a pause. He tried to brush it off. No worries. Just thought I'd ask. But the silence on my end must have stretched too long, because he added, everything okay? I wanted to say, not really. I wanted to ask if he remembered telling me to stay home for my own sister's ceremony. I wanted to ask how it felt to take pride in a daughter while pretending the other one didn't exist. But I didn't say any of that. I just said, I've got a lot on my plate. We hung up soon after. No thanks, no goodbye. Just a quiet end to a short conversation. A few days later, my mom called. Her voice was soft, the way it gets when she's trying to ease into something uncomfortable. She asked about work, then about my health. I kept my answers short. Eventually, she got to the point. You've changed, she said. You've been distant. I didn't deny it. She kept going. I understand you're hurt, but don't let bitterness turn you cold. I remember standing in my kitchen, holding the phone against my ear, staring at the same spot on the wall I always do when I need to ground myself. I'm not cold, I said calmly. I'm just done being invisible. There was silence on the line. I don't think she expected me to say it like that, clean, final, without any tremble in my voice. Well, she said after a long pause, I just hope this isn't who you're becoming. It's not, I replied. It's who I've always been. You just didn't notice. We didn't talk for a while after that. In the weeks that followed, I started pulling back in more concrete ways. I unsubscribed from the family group chat. Stopped sending Hannah birthday reminders. I didn't reach out on holidays. Didn't offer to help plan anything. When my parents hosted dinner for my uncle's retirement, I skipped it entirely. I didn't make excuses. I just declined the invitation and left it at that. To them, it probably felt like a disappearance. To me, it felt like breathing for the first time in years. It wasn't easy at first. There were moments when I'd instinctively reach for my phone to share something, good news at work, a funny story from the grocery store, a memory Hannah would have laughed at. But I'd stop myself. Not out of spite. Just because I didn't want to hand over parts of myself to people who wouldn't hold them with care. Maya noticed the difference almost immediately. You're lighter, she said one afternoon while we were having coffee. Even when you're sad, it feels cleaner. I knew what she meant. The sadness was still there, but it didn't feel sticky anymore. It didn't trap me in the same way. It wasn't the sadness of being ignored. It was the sadness of letting go. About a month later, Hannah reached out. She sent a short message, hey, I know things have been weird. Want to catch up soon? No apology. No acknowledgement. Just a casual wave from across the emotional canyon she helped dig. I stared at the message for a while. I didn't delete it. I didn't respond either. Not out of cruelty. I just didn't know what catching up could possibly mean between us anymore. She didn't follow up. Around the same time, my cousin Olivia got engaged. My mom called to ask if I'd help with decorations for the bridal shower. I'm not sure I'll be there, I said. You always help with this kind of stuff, she said, her tone sharper than I'd expected. I used to, I said. But I'm not doing that anymore. There was another pause. You know, you're starting to sound a lot like Hannah. That made me laugh. Not a big laugh, just a quiet, bitter one. I'm nothing like Hannah, I said. She takes without asking. I just stopped giving. They didn't like it. I could feel it in the small things. My name stopped coming up in family updates. Photos stopped including me. I became the person they referred to vaguely, like a relative who had moved far away and didn't keep in touch. But I kept my distance anyway. Not because I wanted to punish them, but because I was tired of playing the role of the helpful ghost in everyone else's story. The one who appears when needed, then disappears when the spotlight hits. I started pouring my time into things that gave something back. I picked up more hours at work, joined a local hiking group, signed up for a photography class I'd put off for years. I stopped explaining myself to people who didn't care to understand me in the first place. And little by little, the world got quieter. But not empty. Just quieter in a way that felt peaceful. There were still echoes, of course. My mom left a voicemail on Easter, something about Hannah being home for the weekend, how we should all find a way to move forward. I deleted it without listening to the end. I didn't need to move forward with people who never looked back to see who was missing. The thing no one tells you about setting boundaries is how often you'll be accused of cruelty by the people who benefited from your silence. They don't see the years of effort, the hundreds of swallowed feelings, the miles you walked to keep things together. They just see the line you've drawn, and they hate that it means they can't keep stepping over you. But I'd drawn the line anyway. And I wasn't stepping back. Things started shifting in ways I hadn't expected. Not dramatically. Not overnight. But in a quiet, almost bureaucratic way. It started with a voicemail from my Aunt Janice. "Hey sweetie," she said, dragging the vowels like she always did when she didn't know how to start. "Just wondering if everything's okay with the family. Your mom mentioned something about you not coming to the fundraiser next month? And I noticed you weren't at Hannah's thing. Anyway, give me a call." I didn't call her back. Then came a message from one of Hannah's old high school friends, a woman I hadn't seen since college. "Hey, random question. Did you and Hannah have a falling out? She seemed kind of distant when I asked about you. Said things were complicated." I stared at the screen for a long time before deleting the message. It was clear something was happening. And I was pretty sure I wasn't supposed to know about it yet. Then, about a week later, Hannah texted me. It was short. "Hey, can we talk?" No context. No apology. Just that. I waited a full day before responding. Not out of strategy. I just needed time to decide whether I was willing to open that door again, even a little. When I finally wrote back, I kept it simple. "Sure, but I'm not going to clean up the narrative." She replied a few hours later with a thumbs up emoji. No words. Just that little yellow hand. Somehow that made me angrier than a fight would've. Even now, she didn't want to say anything real. I found out what it was about from Maya, of all people. Her coworker's brother was in Hannah's unit, and apparently someone higher up was drafting a press feature on promising young officers. Part of it focused on personal stories, family background, early life, obstacles overcome. It was meant to humanize the uniform, make the public connect to the faces behind it. They'd asked Hannah for names, family references, anecdotes. And suddenly, the version of events she'd been telling for years didn't look so good under scrutiny. Maya told me all this over coffee, her voice low like we were trading classified information. "She's trying to fix it," she said. "Because now it matters how it looks." I nodded, but didn't say anything. The irony wasn't lost on me. She had spent years pretending I didn't exist, reframing her success as self-made, conveniently trimming out the support she didn't want to explain. And now that someone outside our family was asking questions, she wanted me to step in and confirm her revisionist history. That week, I started getting more calls. Messages from people I hadn't heard from in years, family friends, distant cousins, people who'd never bothered to check in before now. All asking some variation of the same question. "Why weren't you at Hannah's ceremony? Are you okay? Is something going on with the family?" I didn't answer most of them. The ones I did, I kept short. "Just taking space," I'd say. That phrase carried more weight than I expected. People didn't push after that. Some even replied with things like, "Totally understandable." Like maybe they'd seen glimpses of the imbalance over the years, but never felt entitled to say anything. The silence was doing its job. I didn't have to explain myself anymore. I didn't have to recount every time I'd shown up for Hannah only to be written out of the story. The absence was enough. And people were starting to notice. Meanwhile, Hannah was stuck. She couldn't exactly go back and rewrite all the interviews she'd given. Couldn't undo years of telling people she'd pulled herself up by her bootstraps. Now that her story was being vetted, now that someone with authority was asking for specifics, she realized that the version of her family she'd presented was full of holes. I didn't know whether to feel vindicated or just tired. The request finally came through an email. It wasn't from Hannah. It was from someone in public relations at the base, asking if I'd be willing to speak briefly for background on Hannah's early life. I sat with it for 2 full days. Reread it several times. Forwarded it to Maya with the subject line, "Thoughts." She called immediately. "What do you want to do?" she asked. I was quiet for a moment. "I want to tell the truth." "Then do that." So I replied. I told the PR officer I was happy to speak briefly and that I would only be sharing facts, no commentary. I didn't want to hurt Hannah's reputation, but I wasn't going to sanitize it either. The call was short. 15 minutes. I told them we grew up in a typical suburban household. That our parents were supportive in a very uneven way. That Hannah had worked hard, yes, but that her journey wasn't as isolated as she sometimes made it sound. She had a lot of support, I said. Not always from the people you'd expect. The woman on the other end didn't press. Just thanked me and said that was very helpful. That night, Hannah texted again. "I heard you talk to them. Thanks." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The weight had already shifted. The girl who'd once erased me from her story was now having to explain my absence. Not just to her superiors, but to the people around her. The story she built couldn't hold without the parts she left out. Meanwhile, I was no longer the one being asked to show up and clean up her image. People started coming to their own conclusions. A neighbor of ours, someone who used to babysit us, sent me a message on Facebook. "I always wondered why they never mentioned you when talking about Hannah. Now I think I get it. Some people only see what fits the narrative they want." She didn't say more than that. She didn't have to. I realized something else around that time. Distance was doing what all my years of effort never could. It was making people see me more clearly. Not because I was louder. Not because I demanded attention. But because I had finally stopped filling in the gaps they left. I'd stopped being the background character who props everyone else up. And in that space, something shifted. Hannah was the one scrambling now. And I was just living. Not proving anything. Not fixing anything. Just living. It was the first time in years I didn't feel responsible for someone else's image of me. The first time I understood that walking away isn't always a retreat. Sometimes it's the most powerful move you can make. A week before Hannah's next ceremony, I got a message from her. No greeting. No explanation. Just a single sentence. "I'd like you to come." No apology. No acknowledgement of the last few years. Just that. I didn't write back. Not because I was trying to make a point, but because I didn't know what a response would even mean. We hadn't spoken beyond logistics in over a year. She hadn't said anything real to me since before the first promotion, the one where she nodded like I was a stranger. I didn't know what this invitation was supposed to fix. Or if it was even trying to fix anything. Still, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Not because I believed things had changed. But because, despite everything, part of me wanted to see it through. To know how the story would land now that the script had been cracked open. So I went. Not out of hope. Not for closure. I went because I wanted to see it all from the back row. I didn't tell anyone I was coming. I bought a ticket late at night and took the train down 2 days before the event. I booked a small hotel room and stayed quiet. I didn't reach out to Hannah. I didn't reach out to my parents. I didn't pack anything special, just a dark dress, clean flats, and a jacket in case it rained. The morning of the ceremony, I arrived early and found a seat in the very last row, near the corner of the room. Far from the center, far from the cameras, and nowhere near the reserved seating. I didn't try to make myself visible. I thought that's where I belonged. The room was bigger than the one from her first promotion. Sleek. Sharper lines. More people in uniform, more badges, more hierarchy in the air. Everyone had someone with them, spouses, children, friends who came with flowers or small flags. I watched them greet each other, laugh, adjust their jackets, and smooth their hair. When Hannah came in, I barely recognized her at first. She looked the same, physically, but there was something more performative about the way she held herself now. The walk, the nods, the forced smiles. Like someone aware she was being watched. My parents sat in the second row, just behind what looked like a row of officers. My dad was fiddling with a fancy new camera. My mom wore the same navy dress from the last event. They looked proud, relaxed, Like the last year hadn't happened. Like I wasn't sitting 20 feet behind them. The ceremony began. Speeches were given. Commendations read. And then Hannah's name was called. She walked to the front, posture perfect, expression composed. Her new title was announced with crisp precision. People clapped. And I clapped too. Not loudly. Not for show. Just enough to mark the moment. Then something happened. The woman who stepped up to pin Hannah's new insignia was tall, sharp uniform, no wasted movement. She placed the pin, shook Hannah's hand, then turned to address the room. She said a few standard things about service, about leadership, about the responsibilities that come with rank. Then she paused, looked down at Hannah, and said, "This officer didn't get here alone." The room quieted just slightly. "She's mentioned someone more than once," the commander continued. "Someone who showed up for her in ways most people never saw. That kind of quiet support doesn't always make the photos, but it shapes who we become." Then she turned. Her eyes scanned the room until they landed on me. There was a moment, brief, still, when it felt like the room stopped breathing. She walked straight toward me, calm and deliberate, and then stood at attention in front of my row. She saluted. "Ma'am," she said, "your support made this possible. Hannah talks about you often." My heart pounded in my chest. I didn't move. Didn't speak. Just nodded once, almost involuntarily. Behind her, the room was still frozen. My father's mouth hung open, like someone had unplugged him. My mother's hand hovered mid-clap, unsure of what to do next. Hannah didn't move. She stared at the floor for a long second, then looked at me. And for the first time in years, she didn't look through me. She looked at me. The moment passed. The commander returned to her place. The ceremony moved on. No one said anything directly after. There was no applause for me. No spotlight. But I wasn't invisible anymore. I could feel it. Later, after the event, I walked out quietly before the crowd started spilling into the reception area. I had no intention of staying. But as I reached the exit, I heard someone call my name. It was Hannah. She didn't look like she knew what she was going to say. Just that she had to say something. "Thanks for coming," she said. I nodded. "That wasn't planned," she added, referring to the salute. I figured. There was a pause. We stood there for a beat too long. Then she said, softer, "I wasn't sure you'd come." I wasn't sure either. She looked down at the floor. I know I should have said something before. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. She kept going. I just didn't know how. I looked at her then, not the officer, not the projection, but my sister. The girl I used to quiz on geography flashcards. The girl who used to fall asleep with her textbooks open while I made tea for both of us. The girl who had erased me, not out of malice, but out of convenience. "I don't need an apology," I said, finally. "But I'm not going to disappear to make space for someone else anymore." She nodded slowly. "I know. We didn't hug. We didn't linger." I walked away a minute later, and she didn't follow. There was no dramatic reconciliation. Just two people standing in the hallway of a government building, finally acknowledging what had been broken. I don't know what comes after that. I don't know if trust rebuilds, or if it just settles into something quieter, something that doesn't expect so much. But I do know that for the first time in years, I wasn't the one chasing her. And when someone saluted me in front of everyone, not for what I'd achieved, but for what I had given, I finally felt seen. Not as a support beam. Not as a helper. But as a person who mattered. Even if no one clapped. Even if no one knew what to say afterward. That was enough. That moment didn't fix everything. It wasn't a reunion. It wasn't a reckoning. It was just a shift, small but undeniable. Like someone nudging a picture frame that had been hanging crooked for years. Things weren't suddenly better. But they weren't the same either. Hannah and I aren't close. That part hasn't changed. But she sends the occasional update now, usually short, sometimes even thoughtful. A promotion. A deployment. A new city. She doesn't expect a long response. And I don't offer one. Sometimes I write back. Sometimes I don't. There's no pretense between us anymore, and in a strange way, that's what makes it easier. She stopped trying to rewrite the past. I stopped trying to be the sister she remembered only when it was useful. Now we exist in each other's lives in small, manageable ways. Controlled distance. Mutual recognition. That's the shape of things now, and I'm okay with that. My parents haven't apologized. I don't expect them to. But they've changed in their own way. Subtly. Carefully. They don't talk down to me anymore. They don't call asking for favors like they used to. And when we do speak, holidays, birthdays, the occasional family check-in, there's a new kind of hesitation in their tone. Like they're aware of the edge now. Like they understand that I'm not going to play the role anymore unless I choose to. It's not warm. But it's not hostile either. Just clearer. Once, a few months after Hannah's second promotion, my mom tried to bring up the salute. We were sitting on the phone, halfway through a conversation about taxes or insurance or something equally dry. Out of nowhere, she said, "That woman who saluted you." I wasn't expecting that. I waited. She didn't continue. So I didn't either. Some things don't need to be unpacked. Some moments just sit there between people, quietly doing their work. The truth is that salute didn't make me feel powerful. It made me feel real. Like I'd finally stepped out from behind the glass everyone had been looking through. That was the legacy, not the ceremony, not the surprise, not the fact that someone in uniform publicly acknowledged me. The real legacy was the silence that followed. The conversations that stopped mid-sentence. The glances across the room. The sudden stillness that told me I'd been seen, truly seen, for the first time in years. It didn't come with applause. It didn't need to. It came with the kind of weight that people don't know how to respond to. And that was enough. Because there was a time when I would have needed someone to say it out loud. A time when I would have waited for the phone call, the apology, the grand gesture that never came. But I'm not that version of myself anymore. Now, I measure things differently. I look at who shows up. Who asks how I am without expecting a favor. Who remembers that I exist outside of my usefulness. I still think about the years I spent trying to prove myself, to Hannah, to my parents, to the entire ecosystem we grew up in. I think about all the time I lost trying to earn space I already deserved. But I don't live there anymore. That version of me is long gone. I've built something steadier since then. A quieter life, maybe. But one that's mine. I changed jobs not long after that ceremony. Took a position that paid less, but gave me more flexibility, more time. I started traveling on weekends, small trips, nothing dramatic. I read more. I sleep better. I stopped giving updates to people who only listen to find ways to dismiss me. Maya says I seem more grounded. That I'm not carrying everything all the time. I think that's the real transformation, not becoming louder, not becoming colder, but learning how to stop carrying what no one else ever helped hold. The family still gathers now and then. Holidays mostly. I go when I want to, not out of obligation. And when I do, it's on my terms. At Christmas, Hannah brought a small gift for me. Just a book, nothing sentimental. She didn't make a speech or try to make a point. She just handed it to me with a quiet, "Thought you might like this." I thanked her. That was it. That's how it goes now. Less performance, more truth. Sometimes I still hear from people who don't know the full story. Old friends of the family, distant relatives, people who weren't there for any of it. They'll say something like, "Your sister's done so well for herself. You must be proud." And I always say she has. I don't follow it up. I don't explain what came before or what it cost me. I don't correct the narrative. I don't need to. Because here's what I've learned. The truth doesn't always need to be shouted. Sometimes it just needs to be seen. And once it is, there's no unseeing it. No matter how much people try to smooth it over, package it neatly, or pretend it was always this way. That's the power of a moment like that. Not in how long it lasts, but in what it reveals. I think we spend a lot of our lives waiting to be recognized by the wrong people. We give so much hoping one day someone will say, "I see you." And when they don't, we tell ourselves it's our fault, that we didn't try hard enough, stay quiet enough, give enough. But the truth is, you can hand someone every piece of yourself and still be invisible to them. The turning point isn't when they finally look at you. It's when you stop waiting for them to. That's what that day gave me. Not closure. Not validation. Just a reminder, I was never the problem. I was just done pretending otherwise. And that was the real beginning. If you've ever had to choose yourself after being pushed aside, I want to hear your story. What moment made you finally draw the line? And how did people react when you stopped playing the role they expected? Drop it in the comments. And if this hit home for you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs the reminder. Being quiet doesn't mean being invisible.